The deafening screech of iron wheels against metal rails announced the arrival of the 3:15 train to Willow Creek, sending a plume of coal-black smoke billowing into the clear Montana sky of 1878. Caleb Thornton shifted his weight from one dusty boot to the other, nervously adjusting his freshly pressed shirt collar as he scanned the passenger cars. Somewhere among the travelers was the woman who had agreed to be his wife, a woman he'd never met, whose face he knew only from a small, faded photograph tucked inside his breast pocket. Caleb wasn't the only man waiting. Several others from surrounding ranches and homesteads lingered nearby, each clutching letters and staring expectantly as passengers began to disembark. Mail-order brides were common in Montana Territory, where women were scarce and men plentiful. Still, Caleb felt a peculiar mix of anticipation and dread. At 32, he'd built a respectable cattle ranch, but years of solitude had left him awkward around people, especially women. The conductor called out, "Willow Creek Station, 15-minute stop," before helping passengers down the steep metal steps. First came the businessmen in their smart suits, then families with children in tow. Finally, a cluster of young women appeared, each looking around uncertainly, letters clutched in gloved hands. That's when he saw her. She descended carefully, one dainty boot after another, her chestnut hair neatly arranged beneath a modest bonnet. Her blue traveling dress was simple but well-made, dusty from the long journey. Hannah Wilson, the woman who had responded to his advertisement seeking a practical, God-fearing woman of good character to share the life of a Montana cattle rancher. Their eyes met across the platform. Caleb raised his hand in tentative greeting, and Hannah's expression shifted from uncertainty to recognition. She took one step toward him, then another. But as she reached the bottom step, her face suddenly drained of color. Her knees buckled beneath her, and without warning, she pitched forward. Caleb lunged forward, covering the distance between them in 3 long strides. He caught her just before she hit the wooden platform, one arm around her shoulders, the other supporting her waist. Her bonnet slipped askew, revealing more of her face heart-shaped, with a delicate nose and full lips now parted slightly. Dark lashes fluttered against pale cheeks as a small crowd gathered around them. "Give her air," someone called. "Is that your bride, Thornton?" asked Frank Miller, another rancher waiting for his own mail-order match. Caleb nodded, not taking his eyes off Hannah's face. "Miss Wilson," he said softly. "Miss Wilson, can you hear me?" She remained unconscious, her breathing shallow. Without hesitation, Caleb scooped her into his arms completely, cradling her against his chest. Her head rested against his shoulder, and something protective stirred in him, a feeling both foreign and instinctive. "She needs a doctor," he said, already moving toward the town's main street. "Tell the station master to watch her trunk. I'll send someone back for it." Dr. James Palmer's office was just 2 blocks from the station. Caleb carried Hannah's limp form down Willow Creek's dusty main street, nodding curtly to the curious onlookers who paused to stare. The mid-July sun beat down mercilessly, and he felt a trickle of sweat run down his back beneath his Sunday shirt. "What happened?" Dr. Palmer asked as Caleb shouldered his way through the door. "She fainted stepping off the train," Caleb explained, carefully laying Hannah on the examination table. "She's come all the way from Boston. My mail-order bride." The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly, but he made no comment as he checked Hannah's pulse. "Likely exhaustion and dehydration." These long train journeys can be brutal, especially for Eastern ladies not accustomed to our climate and altitude. As if on cue, Hannah's eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of summer cornflowers. Confusion clouded her features as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. "Where am I?" Her voice was soft, with a refined Eastern accent. "You're in Willow Creek, Montana Territory, miss," Dr. Palmer said. "You fainted at the train station." Hannah's gaze shifted to Caleb, who stood awkwardly by the door, hat in hand. "Are you Mr. Thornton?" Caleb nodded, stepping forward. "Yes, madam. Caleb Thornton." Recognition dawned in her eyes. "I remember now. I saw you waiting, and then." She attempted to sit up, but winced. "Easy now," the doctor cautioned. "You're suffering from exhaustion and dehydration. When did you last eat or drink properly?" Hannah frowned. "I'm not certain. The journey was very long. I believe I had some tea yesterday evening." "Yesterday?" Caleb exclaimed. But it's nearly 4 o'clock now. Dr. Palmer shook his head disapprovingly. No wonder you collapsed. You need food, water, and rest in that order. He turned to Caleb. Mr. Thornton, I suggest you take Miss Wilson to Mrs. Hollister's boarding house for the night. She's in no condition to travel to your ranch today. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. Of course, whatever's best for Miss Wilson. Hannah looked between the two men, a flush rising to her cheeks. I apologize for causing such trouble, Mr. Thornton. This is hardly the first impression I hoped to make. No trouble at all, Miss Wilson, Caleb replied, surprised by the sincerity in his own voice. Your health comes first. After the doctor gave Hannah some water and insisted she rest for another hour, Caleb stepped outside to arrange accommodations at the boarding house and send a boy to fetch Hannah's trunk from the station. The town was buzzing with activity, cowboys and ranch hands in for supplies, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, a wagon loaded with lumber creaking past. Willow Creek was growing. When Caleb had first arrived 8 years ago, it had been little more than a trading post. Now it boasted a proper main street with a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and even a schoolhouse. Still, it was a far cry from Boston, where Hannah had lived her whole life. Doubt not at him. What had he been thinking, asking an eastern city woman to come all this way to marry him? His ranch was 15 miles outside of town, isolated, primitive by her standards. The 2-room cabin he'd built with his own hands suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. By the time he returned to the doctor's office, Hannah was sitting up, color returned to her cheeks. She'd repinned her hair and straightened her bonnet, though her traveling dress remained wrinkled from the journey. Mrs. Hollister has a room ready for you, Caleb said from the doorway, and I've arranged for your trunk to be delivered there. Thank you, Mr. Thornton. Hannah stood carefully, smoothing her skirts. You've been most kind. Dr. Palmer handed her a small packet. Willow bark tea. Drink it before bed tonight. It will help with any lingering discomfort. Hannah accepted it gratefully, then turned to Caleb. I'm ready if you are. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street. Caleb offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Hannah placed her gloved hand lightly upon it. They walked slowly toward the boarding house, an awkward silence stretching between them. I should explain, Hannah finally said, her voice barely audible above the street noise. Why I answered your advertisement. Caleb glanced at her. Up close, he could see faint freckles across the bridge of her nose, nearly hidden beneath a dusting of face powder. You don't owe me any explanation, Miss Wilson. Perhaps not, but I'd like to give one nonetheless. She took a deep breath. After my father died last winter, I discovered he had accumulated substantial debts. Our home, my childhood home, had to be sold. I found myself with few options. I have some education. I worked briefly as a teacher's assistant, but not enough to support myself adequately in Boston. Caleb listened, acutely aware of her hand on his arm, the subtle floral scent of her perfume. Your letter was different from the others, she continued. You wrote about the land, about building something lasting. You didn't just want a housekeeper or other things. A blush colored her cheeks. You wanted a partner. They reached the boarding house, a 2-story clapboard building with lace curtains in the windows and potted geraniums on the porch. Caleb paused at the bottom of the steps. I meant what I wrote, he said, finding his voice. But seeing you now, I wonder if I was selfish to ask you to come. Life here isn't easy, especially for a woman accustomed to city comforts. Hannah studied his face. Are you having second thoughts, Mr. Thornton? The directness of her question startled him. No, I want you to be certain. The contract gives you 3 days after arrival to change your mind. If you wish to return east, I'll provide the train fare. A smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen. I appreciate your concern, but I didn't travel 2,000 miles on a whim, Mr. Thornton. I came to build a new life. One fainting spell won't deter me. Something inside Caleb's chest loosened at her words. Then perhaps we could start again tomorrow. I'll come at 10, if that suits you. We can talk properly, get to know one another before making any final decisions. I would like that very much. They climbed the steps together, and Mrs. Hollister greeted them at the door, a plump, pleasant woman with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. So this is your intended, Mr. Thornton? Poor dear, I heard about your spell at the station. Come in, come in. I've got a nice room ready, and supper will be on the table in an hour. As Hannah was ushered inside, she turned back to Caleb. "Until tomorrow, then. Until tomorrow, Miss Wilson." He stood on the porch until the door closed behind her, hat still in his hands, wondering at the strange sensation in his chest, like something long dormant was slowly awakening. The following morning dawned clear and bright, with the promise of heat to come. Caleb rose before dawn, as was his habit, and spent the early hours tending to necessary ranch chores before entrusting the rest to his hired hand, a reliable older man named Joe who had worked for him for 5 years. "Going to town to see your bride?" Joe asked, a knowing twinkle in his weathered face. "She's not my bride yet," Caleb reminded him, though the correction felt hollow even to his own ears. He bathed in the creek behind his cabin, shaved carefully, and donned his best shirt, the same one he'd worn yesterday, now freshly brushed. The 15-mile ride to town gave him ample time to think, to rehearse what he might say to Hannah Wilson. In truth, their correspondence had been brief and formal. She had responded to his advertisement in the Boston Herald 3 months ago. They had exchanged only 4 letters each before she agreed to come west. He knew the basic facts of her life: 24 years old, educated at a ladies' seminary, daughter of a bookkeeper, no living family, but little of her character beyond what he could glean from her neat penmanship and proper phrasing. Arriving in Willow Creek, Caleb stabled his horse at the livery and made his way to Mrs. Hollister's boarding house. He'd barely reached the front gate when the door opened and Hannah stepped out onto the porch. The transformation from yesterday was remarkable. Rested and refreshed, she fairly glowed with health. She wore a simple day dress of sage green that complemented her chestnut hair, which was arranged in a practical but becoming style. A small straw hat with a modest ribbon completed the picture. "Good morning, Mr. Thornton," she called, descending the steps to meet him. "You're precisely on time." Caleb removed his hat. "Good morning, Miss Wilson. You look much improved." A small smile played at her lips. A diplomatic way of saying, "I no longer look like death," warmed over. Mrs. Hollister's cooking and a good night's sleep worked wonders. Her light teasing caught him off guard, but pleasantly so. "I thought we might walk a bit, if you're feeling up to it. I could show you the town." "I'd like that very much." They set off down the main street, Hannah's arm once again resting lightly on his. The morning bustle of Willow Creek surrounded them, shopkeepers opening their establishments, ranch hands picking up supplies, women gathering at the general store. "It's smaller than I imagined," Hannah admitted, taking in the wooden buildings lining the dusty street, "but charming in its way." "It's growing," Caleb said. "When I first came here in '70, there wasn't much more than the trading post and saloon. Now we've got a proper school, a church, even talk of a newspaper starting up." "You've been here 8 years, then?" Caleb nodded. "Came west after the war. Worked as a ranch hand for a few years, saved every penny. Bought my own place in '73. "The war?" Hannah glanced at him with new interest. "You fought in the war between the states." "Union cavalry. Enlisted in '63, just turned 17. Fought until Appomattox." He didn't elaborate further. Those were memories he rarely revisited. Hannah seemed to sense his reticence. "My father was too old to fight, but my cousin Edward died at Gettysburg. So many lives lost." They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Caleb guided her toward the general store. "Mr. Peterson carries just about everything a body could need, from sugar to saddles." Inside, the store was a treasure trove of goods. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with canned foods, dry goods, tools, and household items. Barrels of flour, sugar, and coffee beans stood in one corner, while bolts of fabric were arranged by color on a long table. "Miss Wilson," Mr. Peterson called from behind the counter. "Heard we had a new arrival. Welcome to Willow Creek." News traveled fast in small towns. Throughout the morning, as Caleb showed Hannah the rest of Willow Creek, the small church, the schoolhouse, the blacksmith shop, they were greeted by curious townspeople, all eager to meet Caleb Thornton's mail-order bride. By midday, they had completed their tour and found themselves at the small cafe adjacent to the hotel. Over a simple lunch of beef stew and fresh bread, they began to talk more freely. "Tell me about your ranch," Hannah said, breaking off a piece of bread. "In your letters, you mentioned cattle and horses?" Caleb nodded, warming to the subject. 200 head of cattle, mostly Herefords. 20 horses, including some of the finest quarter horses in the territory. The ranch is about 15 miles northwest of town, in a valley with a year-round creek running through it. Good grazing land, sheltered from the worst winter storms. It sounds lovely. It's not much to look at yet, he admitted. The cabin's small, just 2 rooms. I've been meaning to expand it, add a proper kitchen and maybe another bedroom. But there's always been more pressing work. He hesitated, then added, "It would be your home too, if you decide to stay. You should have a say in how it's built." Hannah studied him, her blue eyes thoughtful. "Mr. Thornton, may I ask you something directly?" "Of course. Why did you send for a bride? A man like you established, respected. Surely there are women here who would have accepted your proposal." Caleb considered her question seriously. "Not many unmarried women in these parts, and most who come are already spoken for. But that's not the whole truth." He set down his spoon. "I'm not good with words, Miss Wilson, especially speaking them. Writing letters was easier somehow. I could take my time, think about what I wanted to say." "And what did you want, Mr. Thornton? From a wife, I mean." The directness of her gaze made prevarication impossible. "Companionship, mainly. The ranch keeps me busy from sunup to sundown, but the evenings are long and quiet. Too quiet, sometimes." He paused. "And I want a family someday. Children. A legacy beyond just land and cattle." Hannah nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty. I appreciate it. And you, Miss Wilson? What do you hope to find here in Montana?" She was quiet for a moment, tracing the rim of her water glass with one finger. "Security, initially. I won't pretend otherwise. But also purpose. In Boston, I was simply Miss Hannah Wilson, poor relation, object of pity. A flash of something pride perhaps crossed her face. Here, I could be something more. A wife, a mother, yes, but also a partner in building something meaningful." Her answer pleased him more than he expected. "I'd like that. A partnership, I mean." After lunch, they strolled to the small park at the edge of town, where a few benches offered views of the distant mountains. The July sun was warm, but a gentle breeze made the heat bearable. "The weather is so different here," Hannah observed. "Drier than Boston. The air feels cleaner somehow." "Winters are harsh," Caleb warned. "Cold that cuts to the bone, snow deep enough to bury a man. But spring comes with wildflowers covering the hills, and summers like this," he gestured to the clear sky, "make the hard times worthwhile." Hannah turned to face him fully. "Mr. Thornton, I believe it's time we discussed practical matters. According to our agreement, I have 3 days to decide whether to proceed with the marriage. Today is the first day." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, that's right. I would like to see the ranch before making my decision. Not because I doubt your description, but because if it's to be my home, I should know what I'm agreeing to." "Of course," Caleb said quickly. "We could ride out tomorrow, if you're feeling strong enough. It's about 2 hours on horseback." A flicker of concern crossed Hannah's face. "I should confess that while I've ridden before, it was always side saddle and in a park setting. I'm not experienced with long journeys." "We could take the wagon," Caleb offered. "It's slower but more comfortable for someone not used to riding." "That would be preferable, thank you." She hesitated, then asked, "And after I've seen the ranch? If I decide to stay, when would the wedding take place?" The question sent an unexpected jolt through Caleb. Until this moment, the idea of marriage had been abstract, theoretical. Now, sitting beside this flesh and blood woman with her direct, blue gaze and quiet determination, it became startlingly real. "Whenever you wish," he said. "The circuit preacher comes through town every other Sunday. He'll be here this weekend. Or we could wait until his next visit, if you prefer more time." Hannah considered this. "If I decide to stay, I see no reason to delay. The sooner we're married, the sooner we can begin building our life together." Her practical approach steadied him. "Then I'll speak to Reverend Collins when we return from the ranch tomorrow." As the afternoon waned, they made their way back to Mrs. Hollister's boarding house. At the gate, Hannah paused. "Thank you for today, Mr. Thornton. It was most illuminating." "Caleb," he said suddenly, "if we're to be married, you should call me Caleb." A smile touched her lips. "Caleb, then. And I am Hannah." "Hannah," he repeated, liking the feel of her name. "I'll come for you at 8 tomorrow morning. The journey to the ranch takes about 3 hours by wagon." "I'll be ready." On impulse, he reached for her hand. She allowed him to take it, her gloved fingers curling slightly around his. "Until tomorrow, Hannah." Until tomorrow, Caleb. He walked away with a lightness in his step that hadn't been there before, aware of her watching him until he turned the corner. The next morning dawned with a fiery sunrise that painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Caleb hitched his best team to the wagon and drove into town, arriving at Mrs. Hollister's precisely at 8. Hannah was waiting on the porch, dressed in a practical traveling outfit of navy blue, a small carpet bag at her feet. "Good morning," she called as he pulled up to the gate. "I hope the weather holds for our journey." "Should be fine," Caleb replied, jumping down to help her with her bag. "Might get hot later, but I brought a canvas to rig for shade if needed." Mrs. Hollister appeared in the doorway, a basket in her hands. "I packed some food for your trip. Can't have Miss Wilson going hungry again." She winked at Hannah, who accepted the basket with a grateful smile. "You're very kind, Mrs. Hollister." Caleb helped Hannah up onto the wagon seat, acutely aware of her slender waist beneath his hands as he lifted her. Once settled beside him, she arranged her skirts and secured her hat more firmly against the breeze. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, and with a flick of the reins, they set off. The journey to the ranch took them northwest out of town, following a well-worn trail that wound through rolling grasslands dotted with sagebrush and occasional stands of cottonwood trees. As they left Willow Creek behind, the landscape opened up, revealing the vast expanse of Montana territory in all its wild beauty. "It's breathtaking," Hannah said, gazing at the distant mountains. "So much space. In Boston, buildings crowd together so tightly that sometimes you can't even see the sky properly." "Too much space, some would say," Caleb replied. "It can be overwhelming at first." "I find it exhilarating," she admitted, "as though anything might be possible here." The wagon rumbled over the rutted trail, and Caleb found himself pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area where the best hunting was found, which creeks never ran dry even in the driest summers, the time he'd spotted a mountain lion watching him from a ridge. Hannah listened attentively, asking questions that revealed a practical mind and genuine interest. She wasn't merely being polite. She was trying to understand the land that might become her home. About halfway to the ranch, Caleb pulled the wagon into the shade of a large cottonwood beside a creek. "The horses could use a rest and some water," he explained, setting the brake. Hannah stretched her arms above her head, then caught herself and lowered them self-consciously. "I apologize. That was unladylike." "No need to apologize," Caleb said, jumping down from the wagon. "No one out here to judge but me and the horses, and we don't mind." He helped her down, and they spread Mrs. Hollister's packed lunch on a clean blanket in the shade. The simple meal of cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apple tarts tasted better in the open air, with the sound of the creek burbling nearby and meadowlarks calling from the grass. "May I ask you something personal?" Hannah said as they finished eating. Caleb nodded, curious. "In your letters, you mentioned losing your family young. I know it must be painful to discuss, but I'd like to understand your past better." Caleb picked up a blade of grass, twisting it between his fingers. "Not much to tell, really. My ma died when I was 8. Pneumonia took her one hard winter. Pa raised me and my sister alone after that. He was a good man, tough but fair. Taught me everything I know about horses and cattle." "And your sister?" "Catherine. She was 2 years younger than me. We lost her to diphtheria when she was 14. The memory still ached, even after all these years. Pa never really recovered from that. When the war came, he encouraged me to enlist, said it was my duty. He died while I was away. Heart just gave out one night." Hannah's eyes were soft with sympathy. "So you truly have no family left?" "None by blood. But out here, you make your own family sometimes. Joe, my ranch hand, he's been with me 5 years now. More like an uncle than an employee. And there are folks in town I count as friends. It must have been lonely, though." Caleb looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "Yes, it has been." The simple admission hung between them, more revealing than any lengthy explanation could have been. Hannah reached across the blanket and briefly touched his hand, a gesture so unexpected that Caleb felt it like a physical jolt. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. They resumed their journey shortly after, the horses refreshed and eager. As they traveled, the landscape began to change subtly. The trail dipped down into a broad valley cut by a winding creek, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows. Grassy meadows stretched toward distant pine-covered hills. We're on Thornton land now, Caleb said as they crossed the creek at a shallow ford. Have been for the last mile or so. The ranch house is just over that rise. Hannah leaned forward slightly, anticipation evident in her posture. As they crested the gentle hill, Caleb's ranch came into view below them. The cabin sat on a small rise near the creek, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A large barn, corral, and several outbuildings formed a rough semicircle behind it. In the nearest pasture, horses grazed contentedly, while beyond them, cattle dotted the valley floor. There it is, Caleb said, a note of pride in his voice. Not much to look at, like I said, but it's good land. Hannah was quiet for a long moment, taking it all in. It's lovely, she finally said, and the genuine warmth in her voice eased a tension Caleb hadn't realized he was carrying. I can see why you chose this valley. As they approached the cabin, a figure emerged from the barn. Joe, wiping his hands on a rag. He raised a hand in greeting, his weathered face breaking into a grin. This must be the famous Miss Wilson, he called as Caleb brought the wagon to a halt. Joe, this is Miss Hannah Wilson, Caleb said as he helped Hannah down. Hannah, this is Joe Blackburn, the best ranch hand in the territory. Joe removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. Pleasure to meet you, miss. Caleb's told me all about you. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Blackburn, Hannah replied warmly. I hope not all about me. A lady should maintain some mystery, after all. Joe chuckled appreciatively. She's got spirit, Caleb. I like her already. Joe, would you see to the horses? Caleb asked. I'd like to show Hannah the cabin and the rest of the ranch. Course, boss. Take your time. Caleb led Hannah to the cabin, suddenly seeing it through her eyes, the rough-hewn logs, the simple porch he'd added last summer, the small window with its oiled paper instead of glass. It's not much, he began apologetically as he opened the door. The cabin's main room served as both kitchen and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rough table and 4 chairs nearby. A cupboard held dishes and cooking implements, while an iron stove sat in the corner. Simple curtains, sewn by a neighbor's wife, framed the window. Through a doorway, the second room was visible, Caleb's bedroom, with its narrow bed and chest of drawers. As I mentioned, I've been planning to expand, he said quickly. Add a proper kitchen, another bedroom, maybe a sitting room too, where you could have your own space. Hannah moved slowly around the room, taking everything in. She ran her fingers along the smooth, worn surface of the table, touched the patchwork quilt draped over the single armchair, examined the few books stacked on a small shelf. You built this yourself? She asked. Caleb nodded. Every log. Joe helped with the roof. It's well made, she observed. Solid. And cleaner than I expected a bachelor's home to be. I'm not one for mess, Caleb said. My mother taught me that much before she passed. Hannah moved to the window, looking out at the view of the creek and mountains beyond. Where would you add on? To the back and east side, Caleb explained, moving to stand beside her. The bedroom would become yours, and I'd build a new one for myself. The kitchen would extend from the main room, with a proper window facing the morning sun. And a garden? Hannah asked. Would there be space for a vegetable garden? And perhaps some flowers? The question caught him by surprise, not the practical part about vegetables, but the mention of flowers. It hadn't occurred to him that she might want such things. Of course, there's good soil near the creek, gets plenty of sun. You could have as large a garden as you wish. A small smile played at her lips. I'd like that. I've always envied those with gardens. Our Boston home had only a tiny courtyard, barely enough for a few pots of herbs. They stood side by side at the window, not touching but close enough that Caleb could detect the faint lavender scent of her soap. The moment stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with possibility. Would you like to see the rest? He asked finally. Hannah nodded, and they stepped back outside into the afternoon sunlight. Caleb showed her the barn with its stalls and hayloft, the smokehouse where winter meat was preserved, the root cellar dug into the hillside. Everywhere they went, he pointed out improvements he planned to make: a larger chicken coop, a proper wash house, a second well closer to the cabin. You have vision, Hannah remarked as they walked back toward the cabin. You see not just what is, but what could be. Isn't that what building a life is about? Caleb replied. Seeing possibilities? Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. They ate a simple supper prepared by Joe, venison stew with biscuits and preserved peaches at the cabin's table. Joe regaled Hannah with stories of his adventures before coming to work for Caleb, some of which made her laugh out loud, a bright, clear sound that transformed her face. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Caleb reluctantly acknowledged that they should start back to town. "It'll be dark before we reach Willow Creek," he said. "We should get going." Hannah nodded, though Caleb thought he detected a hint of reluctance in her expression. She thanked Joe warmly for the meal and his hospitality, then turned to Caleb. "I'm ready whenever you are." The journey back to town was quieter than their morning's travel. Hannah seemed lost in thought, and Caleb didn't press her to talk, understanding that she had much to consider. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber, and a cool evening breeze stirred the grass. As the lights of Willow Creek came into view, Hannah finally broke the silence. "I've made my decision, Caleb." He tightened his grip on the reins, heart suddenly pounding in his chest. "Yes, I'd like to stay. To marry you, as we agreed." Relief washed over him, followed by a surge of something warmer. "You're certain? The cabin is rough, and winters here are hard. Town's a long way when the snow flies." Hannah turned to face him, her expression earnest in the fading light. "I'm certain. I came west looking for security, yes, but also for a place where I could be useful, where I could build something meaningful." She gestured toward the distant mountains. "I believe I can find that with you, if you still want me as your wife." "I do," Caleb said, the words coming easily. "Very much." A smile spread across her face, transforming it. "Then we have an agreement, Mr. Thornton." "That we do, Miss Wilson." When they reached Mrs. Hollister's boarding house, Caleb helped Hannah down from the wagon, holding her perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "I'll speak to Reverend Collins tomorrow," he said. "The wedding could be Sunday after services, if that suits you." "Sunday would be perfect," Hannah replied. "That gives me 3 days to prepare." Standing there in the deepening twilight, Caleb was struck by a sudden impulse. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he raised one hand to gently touch her cheek. Her skin was soft beneath his calloused fingers, and she didn't flinch or withdraw. "Thank you for coming all this way," he said softly. "For taking a chance on a stranger and a life you didn't know." Hannah's eyes, luminous in the fading light, held his. "Sometimes the greatest rewards come from the biggest risks, don't you think?" Without overthinking it, Caleb leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a brief, gentle kiss that ended almost as soon as it began. Hannah's eyes widened in surprise, then softened. She didn't pull away or scold him for his boldness. "Good night, Caleb," she whispered. "Good night, Hannah." As he drove the wagon toward the livery stable, Caleb's heart felt lighter than it had in years. Sunday couldn't come soon enough. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of activity. Caleb spoke to Reverend Collins, who readily agreed to perform the ceremony after Sunday services. He then set about making preparations for Hannah's arrival at the ranch, with Joe's enthusiastic help. "About time this place had a woman's touch," Joe declared as they hastily constructed a new dresser for Hannah's things. "Been telling you that for years." In town, Hannah was equally busy. With Mrs. Hollister's guidance, she purchased fabric for new curtains and bedding, cooking utensils she'd need at the ranch, and a few modest personal items. The ladies of Willow Creek, hearing of the upcoming wedding, stopped by the boarding house with gifts and advice for the new bride. "Winters are fierce here," warned Mrs. Peterson, the shopkeeper's wife. "You'll need warmer clothes than those Eastern things you've brought. Men appreciate a good meal after a hard day's work," advised Mrs. Miller, presenting Hannah with a handwritten book of her best recipes. "The way to keep a husband happy is through his stomach." "Nonsense," Mrs. Hollister countered with a wink. "The way to keep a husband happy is far more basic than that, dear." Hannah blushed furiously at this, but accepted all advice with good grace. These women had survived and thrived in this harsh land. Their wisdom, however bluntly delivered, was valuable. On Saturday afternoon, a surprise arrival caused a stir at the boarding house. A wagon pulled up carrying Eliza Barnes, the nearest neighboring rancher's wife, who lived some 10 miles from Caleb's property. "I've come to make sure you have a proper wedding dress," she announced after introductions were made. Can't have Caleb Thornton's bride wearing just any old thing. From the wagon, she produced a beautiful dress of cream-colored silk with delicate lace trim, her own wedding gown from 5 years earlier. I'm a good 4 inches shorter than you, Eliza admitted, eyeing Hannah critically. But my mother left plenty of hem to let down. We can make it work. And so Saturday evening found Hannah standing on a chair in Mrs. Hollister's parlor, while Eliza and 3 other women fussed with pins and needle and thread, altering the gown to fit her taller frame. Have you known Caleb long? Hannah asked Eliza as the women worked. Since I came out as Tom Barnes' bride 5 years ago, Eliza replied, pins held between her lips. He's a good man. You're Caleb. Helped Tom rebuild our barn after a lightning strike burned it down 2 summers back. Stayed for 2 weeks, working from sunup to sundown alongside my husband. He doesn't talk much about himself, Hannah observed. Not his way, Eliza agreed. But watch what he does, not what he says. That's how you'll know his heart. By Sunday morning, Hannah was a bundle of nerves. The altered wedding dress fit perfectly, and Mrs. Hollister had arranged her hair in an elegant style, adorned with a few fresh wildflowers in lieu of a proper veil. As church bells rang across Willow Creek, Hannah took a deep breath and prepared to enter the next chapter of her life. The small church was packed to capacity, not just with regular worshipers, but with every curious resident of Willow Creek and surrounding ranches. Word of Caleb Thornton's mail-order bride had spread quickly, and no one wanted to miss the ceremony. Caleb stood at the front of the church beside Reverend Collins, looking uncomfortable in his best suit, clearly not something he wore often. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, and when Hannah entered on the arm of Mr. Hollister, who had volunteered to give her away, Caleb's expression transformed from nervous to awestruck. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish one another for as long as they both lived. When Caleb slipped a plain gold band onto Hannah's finger, a ring he'd purchased from Mr. Peterson's store just the day before, his hands trembled slightly. By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Collins declared. You may kiss your bride. Caleb hesitated only a moment before leaning forward to place a gentle kiss on Hannah's lips, proper and restrained, mindful of their audience, yet tender in a way that made Hannah's heart flutter. A reception followed at the hotel dining room, where it seemed the entire town had gathered to celebrate. There was food and dancing, with Joe fiddling a lively tune while couples twirled around the makeshift dance floor. Hannah found herself passed from partner to partner as the men of Willow Creek welcomed her to the community. You've caught yourself a good woman, Thornton, Frank Miller declared, clapping Caleb on the shoulder. Don't see many with both beauty and backbone these days. Caleb's eyes found Hannah across the room, where she was deep in conversation with several ranch wives. Yes, he agreed quietly. I'm a fortunate man. As afternoon stretched into evening, Caleb finally reclaimed his bride. We should head back to the ranch before it gets too dark, he said, his voice low near her ear. It's a long ride, and you must be tired. Hannah nodded, a mixture of exhaustion and nervous anticipation coursing through her. This was her wedding night, after all, and while she understood her wifely duties in theory, the reality was now imminent. They bid farewell to their well-wishers, enduring good-natured teasing and ribald jokes with as much dignity as they could muster. Hannah had changed from the wedding dress back into her traveling clothes, and Eliza had packed the precious gown carefully for her to keep. Visit soon, Eliza urged as they said goodbye. It gets lonely with just men for company. We ranch wives need to stick together. The journey to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts as the wagon rumbled through the gathering dusk. Stars began to appear in the darkening sky, brilliant in a way Hannah had never seen in Boston. Look, Caleb said, pointing upward. Shooting star. My mother always said that was good luck. Hannah followed his gaze just in time to see the streak of light across the heavens. It's beautiful, she whispered. The whole sky seems bigger here. It is, Caleb agreed. Everything's bigger, wider, more open. When they finally reached the ranch, Hannah was surprised to see lamps lit in the cabin windows and smoke curling from the chimney. Joe's staying at the line shack tonight, Caleb explained as he helped her down. Thought we might appreciate some privacy. A blush heated Hannah's cheeks at the implication, but she nodded. That was thoughtful of him. Inside, the cabin had been transformed. The table was set with Caleb's best dishes, a bunch of wildflowers arranged in a mason jar as a centerpiece. The fire burned brightly in the hearth, taking the evening chill from the air. Most surprising of all, a copper bathtub had been placed near the fire, steam rising from the water within. Joe's idea, Caleb said, seeing her surprise. Said you might want to wash off the dust from the ride. That was very considerate, Hannah replied, genuinely touched by the gesture. An awkward silence fell between them, both acutely aware of what traditionally came next on a wedding night. I'll wait outside while you bathe, Caleb finally said. Take your time. There's food on the stove if you're hungry. Before Hannah could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. She stood in the middle of the cabin, her new home, and took a deep breath. This was real. She was Mrs. Caleb Thornton now, a rancher's wife in Montana Territory, thousands of miles from everything she had ever known. The water in the tub was gloriously warm, scented lightly with pine needles. Hannah sank into it gratefully, letting the heat soothe her travel-weary muscles. As she bathed, she thought about the man waiting outside, her husband of less than 12 hours, still in many ways a stranger. Yet he wasn't entirely a stranger, was he? His letters had revealed a thoughtful, hard-working man. His actions since her arrival had demonstrated kindness and consideration. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wouldn't notice, suggested an attraction that went beyond mere practicality. After her bath, Hannah dressed in the nightgown and robe she'd purchased in Willow Creek, simple garments, but of good quality, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. She combed out her damp hair, letting it fall loose down her back, then took another deep breath and opened the door. Caleb, you can come in now. He appeared almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting just outside. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in her nightclothes, but he quickly averted his gaze. Are you hungry? He asked, moving toward the stove. There's stew, and Joe made biscuits before he left. A little, Hannah admitted. It's been a long day. They ate at the table, making awkward small talk about the wedding and the guests who had attended. When they finished, Caleb cleared the dishes, moving with surprising efficiency for a man unaccustomed to domestic tasks. Finally, there was nothing left to do, no more tasks to delay the inevitable. Hannah stood by the bedroom doorway, uncertainty written across her features. Hannah, Caleb said softly, crossing to stand before her. I want you to know something. This marriage may have begun as a practical arrangement, but I don't see it that way anymore. Not since the moment I caught you at the train station. She looked up at him, surprised by his candor. I respect you, he continued. And I would never rush you or make you uncomfortable. If you need time, days, weeks, however long before we truly become husband and wife in all ways, I'll wait. The sincerity in his eyes moved her deeply. This was not a man who viewed her as property or merely as a convenience. This was a man offering partnership, respect, and patience, rare commodities in a world where women often had little say in their own lives. Hannah reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. Thank you for that, she whispered. But I don't think I want to wait. His breath caught, and his hands came up to gently grasp her waist. You're sure? In answer, Hannah rose onto her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. Unlike their previous kisses, brief and chaste, this one deepened as Caleb pulled her closer, one hand sliding up to cradle the back of her head. Hannah felt herself responding with an intensity that surprised her, a warmth blooming low in her belly. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I promise to be gentle, he murmured. I trust you, Hannah replied, and realized she meant it completely. He swept her into his arms then, carrying her through the doorway into the bedroom that was now theirs. As he laid her on the bed, Hannah knew with sudden clarity that despite the unusual circumstances of their meeting and marriage, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days that followed took on a rhythm of their own as Hannah adjusted to life as a rancher's wife. She rose early with Caleb, preparing breakfast before he headed out to work with the cattle or horses. She spent her mornings learning the layout of the cabin, organizing her few possessions, and planning improvements to their home. Joe taught her to use the cast iron stove, which had temperamental tendencies known only to those who had wrestled with it daily. Eliza Barnes rode over one afternoon with seeds and cuttings for Hannah's future garden, along with practical advice about which vegetables thrived in Montana's short growing season. Potatoes, carrots, onions, those will see you through winter, Eliza explained as they marked out a plot near the creek. And these raspberry canes will bear fruit next summer if you plant them now. In the evenings, Hannah and Caleb would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in vibrant colors. Sometimes they talked, Hannah sharing stories of her life in Boston, Caleb speaking more openly about his experiences during and after the war. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, her hand in his, content in each other's company. Their nights together grew increasingly tender as initial awkwardness gave way to deepening intimacy. Hannah discovered aspects of herself she hadn't known existed, a capacity for passion that matched Caleb's, a boldness that sometimes made him laugh with delighted surprise. "You're not at all what I expected," he confessed one night as they lay tangled together in the darkness. "Is that a disappointment?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. His arms tightened around her. "Just the opposite. You're more everything than I dared hope for." As July gave way to August, Hannah began to truly make the ranch her own. She sewed new curtains for the windows, planted her garden with Eliza's seeds, and arranged her books and the few precious mementos she'd brought from Boston on the small shelf in the main room. She learned to cook on the temperamental stove, to preserve the wild berries that grew along the creek, and even to milk the 2 cows that provided their dairy needs. One hot afternoon, returning from checking fence lines, Caleb found Hannah in the yard, hanging laundry on a line she'd strung between 2 posts. She'd pinned her hair up in a loose knot, with tendrils escaping to curl damply against her neck. Her sleeves were rolled up, her skin lightly tanned from weeks of Montana sun. He reined his horse to a stop, simply watching her for a moment. She hadn't noticed him yet, humming softly to herself as she worked. Something squeezed in his chest, a feeling so intense it was almost painful. "Hannah," he called softly. She turned, shading her eyes against the sun, and her face lit up with a smile that stole his breath. "You're back early." Caleb dismounted and secured his horse to the hitching post. "Finished sooner than expected," he said, crossing to where she stood. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that Joe might see from the barn or that it was the middle of the afternoon. When they broke apart, Hannah looked up at him with surprise and pleasure. "What was that for?" "For being here," he said simply. "For making this place a home." Her expression softened with understanding. "It is home now, isn't it? Our home." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass near the creek, Caleb cleared his throat nervously. "I've been thinking about the cabin expansion," he said. "With winter coming in a few months, I should start soon if we want it finished before the snow flies." Hannah nodded, leaning against his shoulder. "What did you have in mind?" "Well, that's what I wanted to discuss." He shifted to face her more directly. "I'm thinking we might need more room than I originally planned." "Oh," Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Are you planning to take in boarders, Mr. Thornton?" A smile tugged at his lips. "Not exactly. I was thinking more long-term, about our family." Hannah's breath caught. "Our family. Children," Caleb clarified, his voice gentle. "Our children someday. Maybe sooner than we thought." Understanding dawned in Hannah's eyes. "Caleb, are you asking if I'm—" He nodded. "You've been tired lately. And yesterday morning, I noticed you couldn't stomach your breakfast. My mother was the same way when she was carrying my sister." Hannah's hands went instinctively to her abdomen. "I've been wondering," she admitted. "It's too soon to be certain, but yes, I think I might be." The joy that bloomed across Caleb's face was transformative. He dropped to his knees before her chair, placing his hands gently over hers. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our baby." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes. "Are you pleased? We've been married such a short time, and there's so much work already." "Pleased?" Caleb interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "Hannah, I've never been happier in my life." He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the finest porcelain. Against her hair, he murmured, "When you stepped off that train and fainted into my arms, I had no idea you were bringing me so much more than just a wife. You've brought me a future, Hannah, a family." "I think I knew, even then," Hannah confessed. Not about the baby, of course, but about us. Something told me not to let go when you caught me. And I haven't let go since, Caleb replied, kissing her softly. Nor do I intend to, ever. The weeks that followed were filled with preparations. Caleb, with Joe's help, began work on the cabin expansion immediately, adding not just a larger kitchen, but 2 additional bedrooms, one for them and one for the baby and future children. Hannah ordered fabric and furnishings from the general store in Willow Creek, carefully planning each detail of their growing home. Word of the coming baby spread quickly through the small community. Eliza Barnes arrived with a trunk full of baby clothes her own children had outgrown, while Mrs. Hollister sent a beautiful hand-pieced quilt for the cradle Caleb was building in the evenings by the fire. As summer faded into autumn, the hills around the ranch blazed with golden aspen leaves. The cattle were moved to lower pastures in preparation for winter, and Hannah's garden yielded a bountiful harvest that she preserved in jars lining the new root cellar. One crisp October evening, with the first dusting of snow on the distant mountains, Caleb and Hannah sat on their expanded porch, wrapped in a warm blanket against the chill. Hannah's condition was now obvious, her slender form changed by the new life growing within her. Do you ever regret it? Caleb asked suddenly. Coming west, marrying a stranger, leaving everything you knew behind. Hannah considered the question seriously, her hand absently stroking her rounded belly where their child grew. Sometimes I miss certain things about Boston hot baths that don't require heating kettles of water, shops where you can buy anything you need, concerts and lectures and libraries. Caleb nodded, his expression thoughtful. But regret? She continued, turning to look at him directly. No, Caleb, not for a moment. Everything I truly need is right here. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Next summer, after the baby's born and strong enough to travel, we could take a trip to Boston if you'd like. Visit your old haunts, see your friends. Hannah smiled at the gesture. That's a lovely thought, but I'm not sure Boston is home anymore. She looked out over the valley, at the land they were building together. This is home now. This is where we belong. As the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, swirling lazily in the gathering dusk, Caleb and Hannah Thornton held each other close on the porch of their growing home, watching the land they loved transform beneath a blanket of white. Behind them, lamps glowed warmly in the windows of the cabin that had once stood lonely and bare, now filled with the promise of family and future. And though neither could have imagined it that day at the Willow Creek train station, when an exhausted young woman had stepped off the train and fainted into the arms of a solemn-faced rancher, they both knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly where they were meant to be and who they were meant to be with. In the spring of 1879, as wildflowers once again carpeted the hills around the Thornton ranch, Hannah gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Catherine Elizabeth Thornton, after Caleb's sister and Hannah's mother. Joe rode to town through the mud of spring thaw to fetch Dr. Palmer, but the baby arrived before they returned, delivered by Eliza Barnes, who had stayed at the ranch during Hannah's final weeks. She has your eyes, Caleb whispered in wonder, cradling his newborn daughter with hands that seemed suddenly too large and rough for such a delicate task. The same blue. And your chin, Hannah replied tiredly, but with a smile that lit her entire face. Strong and stubborn. The baby thrived, as did the ranch. That summer, Caleb's cattle herd increased by nearly 50 calves, and the quarter horses he bred began gaining reputation throughout the territory. Hannah's garden expanded to include not just vegetables, but flowers, bright spots of color that made the ranch house visible from a distance. Catherine, called Cat by her father from her earliest days, grew into a curious, strong-willed toddler who followed Caleb everywhere he would allow, perched happily on his shoulders as he performed the less dangerous ranch chores. By her 3rd birthday, she was already showing aptitude with horses, fearlessly reaching up to pat the nose of her father's gentle mare. She's going to be a proper rancher, Joe declared proudly, having appointed himself honorary grandfather to the child. Got a natural way with animals, just like her pa? In the winter of 1882, when Catherine was nearing 4, Hannah gave birth to their second child, a son they named James Joseph Thornton, honoring both the doctor who had saved Hannah's life after a difficult delivery and the loyal ranch hand who had become family. 2 beautiful children. Caleb marveled late one night as they lay in bed, listening to the soft breathing of their son in the cradle nearby. If someone had told me 5 years ago that this would be my life, I'd have called them crazy. Hannah snuggled closer to his warmth. And yet here we are. Here we are, he agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. All because you fainted at the right moment. She laughed softly. And because you were there to catch me. Always, he promised, gathering her closer. Always. As the years passed, the Thornton ranch prospered and grew. Caleb added more land, expanding their holdings to nearly 1,000 acres. The original cabin, now expanded to a proper 6-room house, stood at the heart of a thriving operation that included not just cattle and horses, but a small orchard Hannah had painstakingly cultivated. Catherine, at 12, was already a skilled horsewoman who could ride as well as any boy in the county. James, 8, showed a different inclination, quiet and thoughtful like his mother, with a love of books and a talent for drawing that Hannah encouraged. In 1887, when Willow Creek finally established its first proper school, Hannah was asked to serve as teacher. 3 days a week, she rode into town with Catherine and James, educating not just her own children but a dozen others from surrounding ranches and farms. Never thought I'd be married to a schoolmarm, Caleb teased one evening as Hannah graded essays at the kitchen table. Never thought I'd be a rancher's wife, she countered with a smile. Life takes unexpected turns. By the time Montana achieved statehood in 1889, the Thorntons had added a third child to their family, another daughter, Rose Marie, born in the summer of 1886. The tall, solemn rancher who had once lived in solitude now found himself surrounded by family at every turn. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Caleb surprised Hannah with a journey not to Boston as he'd once suggested, but to San Francisco, leaving the children in the capable hands of Joe and Eliza Barnes for 2 weeks. They traveled by train, a far more comfortable journey than Hannah's original trek west, staying in fine hotels and attending the theater and concerts Hannah had occasionally missed from her eastern life. But it was the return home that proved most illuminating. As their train pulled into Willow Creek Station, the same platform where they had first met, Hannah felt a surge of emotion. It's strange, she said as Caleb helped her down the steps. I remember being so terrified that day, stepping off the train to meet a stranger who would become my husband. Caleb's hand tightened around hers. I was just as scared, he admitted. Afraid you'd take one look at me and demand passage back east. Hannah laughed. Instead, I fainted at your feet. Not much more dignified. Best moment of my life, Caleb said seriously. The moment everything changed. They collected their luggage and hired a wagon to take them the 15 miles to the ranch. As they crested the final hill and the valley came into view, both felt the same sense of rightness, of coming home. The children ran to meet them. Catherine, now a leggy teenager, James growing tall, little Rose with her dark curls bouncing as she ran. Behind them came Joe, slower now at 70, but still straight-backed and vital, and the 2 younger ranch hands Caleb had hired as the operation expanded. That night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Caleb and Hannah sat on the porch swing he'd built the previous summer. The Montana sky stretched above them, a canopy of stars so brilliant it seemed one could reach up and touch them. 15 years, Hannah mused, her head resting on Caleb's shoulder. Sometimes it feels like we've always been here together. And sometimes, Caleb replied, it feels like just yesterday that you stepped off that train and into my arms. Hannah looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her, lined now with years of sun and wind and laughter, but still handsome, still the face of the man who had caught her when she fell and never let go. I love you, Caleb Thornton, she said simply. More today than yesterday, and not as much as I will tomorrow. He lowered his head to kiss her, a kiss as sweet and tender as their first, yet infinitely richer for the years between. And I love you, Hannah Thornton, until the stars fall from the sky. They remained on the porch late into the night, wrapped in each other's arms beneath a quilt Hannah had pieced during the long winter evenings, watching as shooting stars traced bright paths across the Montana sky, each one a wish, a promise, a reminder of all they had built together. And if anyone had asked either of them if they could imagine a different life, a life where Hannah hadn't responded to that advertisement, where Caleb hadn't been waiting at the station, Where a moment of weakness hadn't brought them together, both would have answered with absolute certainty that no, they could not. For the life they had created together, with all its challenges and joys, was exactly the life they were meant to live. In the decades that followed, the Thornton Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the state. Catherine eventually took over much of the ranching business, proving herself as capable as any man in managing the livestock and land. James went east to college, the first in the family to do so, returning with a degree in engineering and new ideas that helped modernize the ranch. Rose, the youngest, inherited her mother's love of teaching and eventually took over Hannah's position at the Willow Creek school. Hannah and Caleb watched their family grow to include spouses for their children and, eventually, grandchildren who filled the expanded ranch house with laughter and life. Joe remained with them until his peaceful passing in 1902, having seen the ranch and family he loved flourish beyond anyone's expectations. As the 20th century dawned, bringing automobiles and telephones and other modern conveniences even to rural Montana, Hannah sometimes marveled at the journey that had brought her west as a desperate young woman with nothing but hope and determination. "Do you ever wonder," she asked Caleb one evening as they sat on their porch, gray-haired now, but still strong, watching their grandchildren chase fireflies in the summer twilight, "what would have happened if I hadn't fainted that day at the station?" Caleb considered the question, his hand finding hers as it had countless times over their many years together. "I'd have caught you anyway," he said with certainty. "One way or another, Hannah, I'd have found a way to catch you." And as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening Montana sky, Hannah knew he was right. Some things were simply meant to be as inevitable as the changing seasons, as certain as the sun rising over their beloved valley each morning. Their meeting at that train station hadn't been mere chance or coincidence. It had been the beginning of a journey they were destined to take together, hand in hand, heart to heart, through all the years of their lives. "I'm glad it was you," she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I'm glad it was always you." "And I'm glad," Caleb replied, pressing a kiss to her silver-streaked hair, "that I never let go."